I accept that many people did flee from places like I'm trying to think of the name. Lod. What's that called in?
Lod is in Palestine.
Yes, for example. Yes, it was 50,000 people left in a couple of days in 1948, for example. I'm trying to but anyway, yes, I know that these people could ended up on the eastern side of the River Jordan, in many cases, not the western side. Anyway, so to return to the point there that I tried to make, that the 1990s had a lot of people coming from the West Bank and working inside Israel itself. A friend of mine had a construction company, all his workers were Palestinians. So a situation which had by about 2002 when no Palestinians, and Israel, for example, was effectively importing people, taking immigrants from places like Thailand. And so this clearly must have caused a great deal of economic hardship. But how did you get from one point to another point?
Oh, first of all, let me correct, this was not the 90s. The open border policy was in the 80s, 70s and 80s. By late 80s, early 90s, Israel has already started, before the Oslo process, before the peace, before anything, Israel has already started constructing a closure system, restricting movement of people and requesting people to have permits and magnetic cards, etc. And ever since then, the movement of people became extremely restricted to the moods and to the political climate rather than the economic situation. And it was always used as a pressuring tool, a collective punishment tool, ever since the early 90s. And then numbers start dropping sharply from the early 90s until today, so it didn't start in 2002. The climax of it was in 2002, but it was already there. And numbers dropped from 120,000 people working in Israel on a daily basis to less than a few thousands in early 2000. So the phenomena is a much older phenomenon, and it has nothing to do with the second intifada, if that is your question.
Yes, yes.
No, it has nothing to do with the second intifada. When the second intifada arrived, yes, there were many people going and coming, but the system of closure was already there, and the disturbance of the daily regular flows of labor and of goods was already disturbed.
Yes. Now, one of the things that the Israelis would also argue is this: is that Israel is in fact it's a very narrow country. I mean, I've stood at the West Bank near Tira, which is an Arab-Israeli town, but I mean, if you're going further east, stood there, I've taken a photograph. You've got one Arab-Israeli village, then you've got another, which is Tira, then you've got Netanya, and then you've got the sea. It's very, very narrow. Israel has been attacked many times. Would you agree that Israel has a right to defend itself?
Every country has a right to defend itself, but Israel has never really had to defend itself. It's always on the attack, my friend. And throughout its history, it's on the offense, not on the defense. So this whole argument that Israel had to defend itself is false. And you don't defend yourself just by building fortresses and borders and walls and wires. This is not protection. A small little boy can come and dig a tunnel underneath your wall and go and devastate whatever he or she wishes to devastate. Security comes first and foremost from within, from inside, from your belief and from your own source of security. And I think the Israeli society has to start the self-searching exercise. Where they really look inward and into themselves, how they want to. I think that very small, beautiful piece of land that is called Palestine is accommodating, and it can accommodate all of us. It can accommodate them, and it can accommodate us. But we have to abandon our exclusive approaches. We have, all of us have to cease to think in a very exclusive terms. We have to be inclusive. We have to know that there are others that exist. They have their own concerns, they have their own ambitions, they have their own culture, but we can perfectly coexist. That is how I want to see Palestine. I personally want to see Palestine. Maybe it won't come at my young age. Maybe my sons and daughters would witness that, but that's the only exit, my friend. We can keep talking and talking until the morning. But the bottom line is that one small piece of land could not be carved, really. It has to be shared. That it has to be shared in a very genuine manner, not just a shared, this is peace for me and this is peace for you. You know, we can all live in all of the land, but respectively, and